コートに残るのは勝った
んです。目の前に立ちはだかる高い高い壁。その向こうはどんな眺めだろうか。どんな風に見えるだろうか。俺一人では決して見ることのできない頂の景色。
行くぞ、ひなた。
If there were ever an anime that could be used better than any other at introducing newcomers to the medium or convincing seasoned veterans to try a genre they so long ago dismissed, it's Haikyuu. Adapted into anime form in 2014 and based on a manga still publishing since 2012 to great commercial success, Haikyuu has made a name for itself not only in the sports genre, but in the anime and manga communities altogether. It may even be up for consideration as the best currently running shonen series, at least until Hunter x Hunter returns to reclaim its crown. Unfortunately, we can only dream that will ever happen. To say that Haikyuu is discussed with critical acclaim is an understatement. Haikyuu has managed to achieve the rare position of appealing to people already accustomed with shonen or sports anime tropes, as well as being highly accessible to a much wider audience, and as a result has amassed a pretty sizable fanbase. At first glance, or watching clips on YouTube, or even watching the first few episodes, it can leave you scratching your head as to how such a seemingly typical shonen anime has garnered such high esteem. However, there seems to be this shared understanding amongst those who go on to watch through all of seasons 1, 2 and 3 and now season 4 that Haikyuu is really fucking good. Hajime no Ippo, Slam Dunk, Kuroko no Basket, Diamond no Ace. These are the anime that come to mind when you mix shonen and sports, or at least these are some of what's listed at the top when you search that on my anime list. Because that's the thing, I don't care about sports. And looking at my profile, you would think that I don't care about sports anime as well. For comparison, the only other series I've completed that share this genre are Ping Pong the Animation, Chihaya Furu and Run with the Wind, all of which you could easily say way more into different genres entirely. And yet when you do that search, what series dominates the scores? What series has 3 of its 4 seasons higher than any other, and with the lowest rated first season more popular than any other? Perhaps the reason I felt so drawn to watching Ping Pong, Chihaya Furu and Run with the Wind, and not pursue any other sports anime after enjoying these so much, is they exhibit qualities outside of the genre that I am interested in. With Ping Pong, it's the explosive art style and coming-of-age themes. With Chihaya Furu, I guess it stood out because karuta is such a unique topic, that and the fact that it just looked nice and laid back, Run with the Wind I could relate to because of its focus on college-age characters instead of the usual high school age. And beside all these, Haikyuu is no different. Whilst it seems more in line with the rest of the genre, and the reasoning to becoming so engaged with it isn't so clear prior to starting watching, it definitely has more subtle aspects to it that become apparent after watching, and which have caused me to watch and watch until there was no more left, and then go right around and rewatch again. Haikyuu really is a shining example of the potential and depth of simplicity. It's unique in that it has reached such a high rating seemingly without trying to introduce something blatantly new to the medium. The story isn't complex, the characters aren't particularly complex besides how they differ personality-wise, there isn't some intricate narrative connected mystery involving their backstory that spans the entire length of the series and culminates in a grand holy shit moment. Haikyuu is special in that it isn't really special, or at least it doesn't feel so when you're watching it. It's just fun, building on and perfecting the basic techniques and stylistic choices that are present in so many other anime and shonen series. But if there was something special hidden in there, what would it be? You see other shows as high on a rating list as Haikyuu, but a lot of the time they feature some new concept or approach a familiar concept in a new and exciting way, sometimes just straight up subverting that genre's tropes entirely. The anime community can easily recognise these anime as standing out from the crowd, especially in specific cases where the anime either invents many of the archetypes of its genre or surpasses all others that came before it so massively that there's no arguing which is objectively superior. Cowboy Bebop, Hunter x Hunter, Gintama, these are near-instant classics creating this mass opinion that even if this or that isn't one of your personal favourites, it's still worthy of recommendation to anyone who wants to get into anime, or just further delve into animation in general. From anime like this, there's something not only to learn from whatever personal connection you develop from the story, characters and themes, but also from the difference in quality they make obvious that separates the good from the great. Hunter x Hunter has an amazing power system that's basically unrivaled in the history of shonen, alongside its vast and intriguing world. Cowboy Bebop created its own genre with a mix of sci-fi and western, and has possibly the most respected soundtrack in all of anime. Gintama is... here's what I'm trying to say. Haikyuu doesn't seem to have an obvious standout aspect like these shows that make it clear why it deserves such high praise. Haikyuu does stuff a lot of other anime does, it just does it better. Way better in some places. So you still can't figure it out. How does Haikyuu stand up on the same level as these all-time greats? What makes it so good? You think, oh well, it's exciting, it's just fun, it makes me hype, and you compare it to stuff that makes you feel similar. Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia, fantasy, sci-fi, battle-oriented stuff, but Haikyuu is different from those as well. With anime like that, it's exciting, and to a certain extent you care about what's happening, but at the end of the day it's set in a fantasy universe, and it can be easy to accidentally remind yourself of that fact every now and then. The hurdle anime like that has to continuously cross is maintaining a level of realism that makes sense in that world, that feels suitable and maintains that suspension of disbelief long enough for the audience to go, thinking along those lines, realism could be the secret ingredient. In comparison to stories like that, Haikyuu is set in a more true-to-life scenario, almost like it's a slice-of-life anime disguised as a sports one. So now I don't have to so thinly stretch my suspension of disbelief. I can way more naturally relate to these characters, what's happening to them and around them, even if I've not physically experienced playing volleyball myself. But my awareness of its real existence allows me to easily translate the anime's representation of it, as opposed to some completely outlandish concept like humanity being slowly killed off by hordes of mindless giants. Maybe what's special about Haikyuu isn't that it's not special, but that it's not trying to be special, and doing that has in turn made it special? Wait, what? Haikyuu isn't focused on setting up some pre-decided, deep-rooted subplot about the character's entire life leading up to a single climactic sequence of events. It's more arbitrary than that. It feels more real and free-flowing. We have fun with these characters in the moment, playing volleyball, focused on volleyball, and we wish that we could befriend our favourite characters to learn more about them and experience it all with them.
見事先輩いっそすがすがしいな
but then there are other characters that pop up and get their time to shine, whether it be solo or as a group, giving us these fresh personality crossovers, and we forget about our want to see those other characters because we're content with what we have now. Haikyuu makes you a better person. It motivates you. It makes you want to get out and make friends, to share a passion with those friends and get better at something you can be proud of. It teaches you that there is no visible boundary to your potential, and there's always something to learn, always a different way to go about achieving something. It teaches you modesty, making the best of what you have and cherishing the small moments in between big events instead of just waiting for the payoff. Without that build-up, the small experiences and personal developments along the way, the final payoff would never be as memorable or have any reason to exist. Characters that feel real, part of a real community for a real sport. I care so much about these guys and whether they can meet their own expectations, win that game, jump that hurdle, whatever, that it feels real. Haikyuu does such a great job at making you feel both a part of this team and envious of it. You don't feel like an outsider, but it creates this fantasy-like depiction of a community so passionate and engaged in one activity and just excited to see each other grow so much that you kind of get swept up and lost in the adrenaline of their experiences to reach each goal. Even when characters have personal developments that affect them more than anyone else, you can still see the ways it changes the team as a whole, whether it be an immediate change like the assignment for tomorrow's match, or a long burn one where their playstyle and friendship evolves over time for better or worse. You feel a part of the team that is Karasuno, but also of the high school volleyball community as a whole, because as Haikyuu teaches us the further we get in, even though Karasuno are the protagonists from our perspective, from the other team's perspectives, they are the protagonists. At the end of the day, every character, besides a few exceptions, are just volleyball nutjobs. A big appeal of Haikyuu is that it doesn't just show us the emotions of one team. When whomever we're currently following wins, it makes us feel proud of their accomplishment, but also sad for the opposing team, especially towards the end of a high-stakes tournament. Even teams we know little about, having barely seen them play at all, if ever, and we just see the one game they lose across 1 or 2 episodes, the result of that game is still as impactful for us as it is for them. Even when a team who, if someone pulled a gun to your head and you had to choose them as the antagonists, wins or loses a big game, it still elicits those feelings. Managing to make rival teams and characters as equally likeable as Karasuno is a significant achievement in and of itself, and results in just a more fun watching experience overall, because we don't end up with some seething hatred for a certain individual or team. However, Haikyuu takes it to the next level by making every single one of them feel real and as open for potential development on a level as detailed as our main cast. We end up not just following a single team through a tournament, but having this whole range of characters to watch out for and care about. In many scenarios, it can become less about the end result of winning or losing, and more about how everyone interacts and how they change each other's stories along the journey, a journey in which they are their main character. The characters feel so genuine and so well realised through writing, animation and performances that you reach a stage where you can guess their individual varied reactions and feelings surrounding the events of a scene, even if they're not explicitly shown at that moment. Their personalities are expressed so well just within the sphere of playing volleyball that we can understand them to this extent even without focusing heavily for any stretch of time on their personal life or history. Instead, Haikyuu resorts to small snippets of these backstories being developed over time or in key moments, or even just when it feels like the right time for the place the narrative is currently at. As a result, we focus almost entirely on just volleyball, and there's pretty much never a dull or slow episode. When I watch Ping Pong the animation, for instance, a certain character might be really good in all the ways a character should be on paper. I understand their emotions and motivations, and it's all top-notch storytelling, voice acting and animation, perfect for what that anime was aiming to achieve. However, at its core, I still get this small feeling that that character exists to represent a certain theme or to fulfill some other narrative purpose, even if it's something as simple as creating a relationship between two characters. Haikyuu is different to me, and I enjoy the characters here much more so because its characters don't feel like they need to exist mostly to fulfill a purpose. They are individuals and have a place in this anime just as they are. We can enjoy them for who they are no matter how much or how little they offer to progressing the story or thematic qualities of Haikyuu. I just like what they can add to a scene in the moment as opposed to questioning or analysing their impact, importance and potential to the story. Just seeing how a group of characters play off each other in a comedic or emotionally resonating way is enough for me to feel invested in them and to feel like they're worth remembering. Something the story and structure does really well is feel like it maintains a fairly fast pace all the way through. This isn't necessarily true, as there are certainly stretches of episodes, usually in the first half of a season, that focus on getting us back into the flow of things before a tournament begins. What Haikyuu succeeds at is making it seem fast-paced by just having good pacing in general. No series of events feels like it lasts too long or too short, and because we have such a diverse cast of characters, an arc can flow between them and develop them simultaneously, rather than putting heavy focus on a single person for any lengthy time. Even so, Haikyuu is able to keep the characters interesting without rehashing old resolved plot points. They have struggles and conflicts that they overcome, so that even the slower training parts of season 1 and 2 feel important and necessary by the time the tournaments are in full swing, where the full breadth of that development we spend time on can be appreciated. In fact, I wouldn't even say you ever feel like these arcs are just necessary, because they're pretty entertaining on their own.
おい食え無理やりでも食え
あバレエやんのそのシューズバレエの
翔陽はいつも新しいね
カラスの逆転
This time is important for the characters as they come of age and learn new things about themselves and others in the disguise of volleyball. It's exciting to the characters, and because we see many moments from their numerous perspectives, it's exciting to us as well, especially as we itch closer to that tournament arc that the characters and audience alike are so readily anticipating. If Haikyuu didn't do nearly as good of a job as it does at investing us in these guys, then this relatively low-stakes high school hobby wouldn't have anywhere near the same impact. And that's the thing that's easy to forget with Haikyuu. It's just a hobby. It's just a high school club activity. But you get so caught up in how excited the characters are and get so hyped as a result that you really feel more like they're saving the world rather than playing just volleyball with their friends. Any half-assed attempt at adapting this manga could have made this all seem negligible, as if they were all over-exaggerating the extent to which they care about this club. But here it feels authentic. I don't feel like these characters are pretending to be the professional players they look up to. In fact, not once so far in the series have we even heard mention of or seen the existence of adult competitive players. With Karasuno and the other high school teams, such as Nekoma, Aoba Josai and Shirato Izawa, I feel like we're witnessing the early days of people who might become those world-renowned athletes. We have the pleasure of seeing them as they grow into adults in this comparatively wholesome, youthful community. Some of them are destined to become great, whilst others, who are coming to the end of their high school career, might relax and retire from the competitive side of this sport altogether. Whichever it is, I'm glad Haikyuu does such a great job at maintaining the feeling that these are kids having fun, even if it can sometimes get out of hand and we feel like they're fighting a world-ending final boss.
絶対負けねえ
Along the same lines as this, the characters' individual stories, personalities, and their relation to the way they play volleyball build really naturally over time. Haikyuu really stands out amongst other sports anime in how it manages to keep a naturally progressing and grounded feeling to the way volleyball is presented throughout the series, and it ends up complementing the way the characters are handled really nicely. Whilst my personal experience with this genre is limited, I've heard that in some other sports animes it can be hard to feel invested in a specific sports setting or to relate to the characters because of how they seem to play the sport on some inhumane level. When we first see the main characters, or perhaps when a new powerful antagonist is introduced, they already seem like sports geniuses, or at least very quickly reach that level. As I said before, the characters for each team in Haikyuu are just teenagers who vary in experience and maturity as you would expect from the 3 to 4 year age range amongst them. They constantly learn from each other, adapting to each team's wildly different playing styles.
いいですかいいよ
This means that not only are the characters unique because of their personalities, but because of how they clash when interacting within the mechanics of a game of volleyball. No one team plays the exact same way against every other team. It becomes about learning your rival's preferred plays, strengths and weaknesses at any given moment, whether that be across 20 games or taking place over the course of a single one. Of course, there are still certain gimmicks that are introduced, sometimes at a key moment of an intense tournament match, which adds another element of tension to the episode and an intimidation factor to the opposing team. When I say gimmicks, I'm referring to when a character possesses some skill or power that at that time is unique to them. I'm talking about Kageyama and Hinata's freak quick attack, the guest monster of Shirato Izawa, or even Ushijima's left-handed attacks. What's important to note, however, is that whilst when these skills are first introduced, they do seem like overpowering abilities, what Haikyuu does is, over the course of a match, make these skills just that, another skill, another completely viable optional playstyle that, whilst very impressive, is nothing close to a superpower.
バレーは常に上を向くスポーツだ。まったくだ。
I think the reason Haikyuu can spend so much time on volleyball without ever feeling boring is basically coming back to what we mentioned at the start of this video, realism. The characters aren't playing at such a high level that we cannot even comprehend what's going on. Instead, we learn about the intricacies of the sport along with them, and come to realise that there is always something new to learn, something new that can be used to great effect in a specific situation, or an entire play style that you must adapt to win against. Now, instead of the same plays being made over and over but presented in more exaggerated ways, the plays can be shown in a way that allows the audience to call back on what they've learned. We see the cogwheels turning at every moment and understand why a team gained 1 point over the other. It's so simple, but I can imagine it was quite difficult to expand all aspects of volleyball over the course of a story in a way that not only keeps it entertaining, but has the audience more engaged than they otherwise would be. The end result is it makes volleyball something really thrilling and personal, to the point where fans of Haikyuu have found themselves seeking their own volleyball endeavours in real life. So our knowledge of volleyball and the characters develop so naturally over time that they basically work in sync with each other, and the qualities of both aspects are employed fully into each other. An example of how the way the characters are presented affects our view of volleyball is the way in which we view top players of various teams at certain stages of the series. When a new powerhouse team is introduced, there's usually one player, or even two if they're really driving forward the intimidation factor of this team, who stands out amongst the rest as being on another level. Either they possess some insane gimmick that the opposing team must find a way around, have some other genius level awareness, or are just straight up more skilled than everyone else. Examples of this would be Oikawa, Bokuto, and of course Ushijima. What's interesting that Haikyuu does with players and teams like this is making them at first seem like some unreachable high goal to defeat, but quickly introduce their personalities and show us their wholesome friendships to make us realise that they're not some kind of gods amongst mortals. Our boys at Karasuno have some pretty amazing players in their own right that can easily match up against the likes of these other guys, but because we have spent so much time with them, seen their intimate relationships and comedic moments, they pose no intimidation factor to us. Kageyama is a genius setter, Hinata has insane reflexes to hit near impossible shots, Nishinoya is a fantastic libero, Tsukishima has the intelligence and awareness to block otherwise unblockable spikes. The list goes on. We know these characters in and out, so of course when we see a new team introduced, whether they are friend or foe to Karasuno, and we focus on just their top players, it can be easy to forget the smaller players in those teams that play no smaller a part in the grand scheme of things. They still contribute to a match massively, supporting each other and showing off their less obvious but still unique skills and styles. And just like how those rival teams might only focus on Hinata and Kageyama as the players to look out for in Karasuno, we are watching who to be wary of in their teams. As reinforcement of this, the rival team who is perhaps most friendly and close to the audience and Karasuno is Nekama, and by the time we're in the training camp arc of Season 2, Nekama doesn't seem to have any single standout player. We've grown close enough to them that we see what all of them can individually offer to the team, rather than just focusing on Kenma's intuitive playstyle or Karu's read blocking. All the characters are great, but it makes sense that that wouldn't stop a couple of players from each team getting the spotlight. It's not a bad thing, and it feels earned because those characters have built a reputation that they're good at what they do. Other teams have a reason to fear them specifically, or in Hinata's case, just stare in awe, inspired or surprised by the display of skill and ingenuity that they are witnessing while still learning more details of the sport themselves. Characters create their legend in the community, and whilst when we first meet them, we view them under the veil of badassery and amazement. As we grow closer and bond with them, we get to see the truth of their childish, goofy nature.
あれ何
知らん。あんま
To put it simply, the way the characters are brought up and displayed across a season actually massively impacts the intricacies of volleyball, such as the tactics one team uses against another, which player they put more focus on, who we in turn focus on as well. It further cements that feeling of not just being another observer, but being a part of this lively volleyball ecosystem. Now from here on out, I'm not going to hold back in terms of spoilers, so if you haven't watched Haikyuu up to finishing Season 3 and don't want to hear specific story, character and theme discussions, I recommend you don't watch beyond this point. There are moments of extreme hype and adrenaline that get your heart racing, moments that send chills through your body, quiet, wholesome and personal moments, and montages that show the hard work our characters put in. None of them feel unnecessary to reaching our destination. There's currently 4 seasons of Haikyuu in anime form, with the 3rd season, Karasuno vs Shiratorizawa, being an all-out brawl for its 10-episode run. But seasons 1, 2 and To the Top all start off comparatively slower and relaxed.
これは現実だ。まず受け止めて冷静に。
At the start of Season 1, the first episodes show us the main Karasuno cast getting to know each other. We see Hinata start playing volleyball, and after the time skip we get a little Kageyama backstory as well. But it's not until after the show branches out and introduces teams from other schools that it really leaps to that extra special level. Whilst the first half of Season 1 and the tournament matches in the second half aren't as intense or high stakes as those in later seasons, it's definitely beneficial for setting up narratives to develop later on. For example, Hinata and Kageyama quickly go from enemies to friends as a crucial element of their duo playstyle becoming viable, and the cheerful rivalry between Karasuno and Nekoma that gains fuel again in the spirit of the years-old rivalry between Coach Ukai and Nekomata. The most important thing, however, has got to be what we learn about our third-year teammates, Daichi, Asahi, Sugawara and Kyoko Shimizu. Episode 9 of Season 1 does a great job at quickly developing these upperclassmen's prior fallout before the first years joined the team, doing so over the course of a friendly match through a series of flashbacks. The final payoff of this scene is a chill-inducing moment where the other third years support Asahi, the team's ace player, in regaining his confidence.
おらい柴田さんすごーもう一本
Asahi suffered the most out of all of them from their devastating loss at the hands of Data Tech, where all of his spikes were blocked by their infamous iron wall, causing him to have an argument with Libero Nishinoya and ultimately quit the volleyball club until now. This is the first time we really get to see the bond between the third years and the tenacity of second year Nishinoya, who was refusing to rejoin the team if Asahi continued to insist on not playing. It also sets up one of the main, not really conflicts, but narrative arcs of this season of getting back a win against Data Tech, which plays out along Kageyama's rivalry with Oikawa. Being given this emotional past experience that shaped who they were before we even knew them shows us the strength and willpower that drives these third years forward, and later helps them lay the foundation to support the first and second years. Seeing these past events through the flashbacks really makes the third years pop to life, and it becomes obvious in this moment that we won't be focusing on just the first years for the foreseeable future. Even though they beat Data Tech towards the end of Season 1, we see that there's still plenty of room for development later on, and that matchup basically added another rival team to Karasuno's list. While Season 2 focuses more heavily on Hinata and Kageyama's determination to beat Oikawa, as well as their simultaneous declaration of war with Ujijima, the third year's characters are no less present or less important. They, as well as the second years, obviously still want to be Toikawa, but that plotline definitely feels more emotionally connected to Hinata and Kageyama. Instead, how Season 2 decides to keep these characters interesting is to show how they can more casually develop alongside the first years as supporting characters and supporting their younger team members' talents. The third years decide to stick with the team at a time where the third years of other high school teams are dropping out to focus on exams. With Daichi, Asahi, Shuka and Kyoko staying on, they increase efforts on improving their personal skills to keep up with the talented first and second years, whilst also determined to achieve their once forgotten goal of making it to nationals, which now has some hope of being reached. After 3 seasons of building up this massive aspiration between the 4 of them, from when they were innocent first years to down on their luck second years with a barely functioning volleyball team, to mature and stoic third years who deserve their dreams becoming true more than anyone else in the series, they finally beat Shirato Izawa and earn their ticket to nationals, and we get one of the most chill-inducing emotional climaxes of the entire series thus far, where they huddle together, exhausted from their 5-round long match and from the past 3 years of their efforts. One of my favourite supporting characters is with the newly recruited manager who the current manager, Kyoko, found to replace her for when she and the other third years inevitably leave. Throughout the first half of Season 2, we see many moments from Hitoko Yachi's perspective. It's this thing Haikyuu does every now and then for an episode or string of episodes where many moments in that time feel more like they're from a single character's perspective, but not so much that it overshadows everybody else. We just have a little more focus on them for this period, whether it be a look into their backstory or we hear their internal monologue more than usual. This feeling of focus on one character's view of things might not even span the entire running time of an episode, only lasting for a single scene, but even if that's the case, it's often the most crucial and developmental part of the episode. This is certainly the case with the introduction of Hitoko into the story, who brings a fresh, innocent perspective to Karasuno so that we can again experience the wonder of seeing them play volleyball through new eyes. We also see the positive impact she has on the team as a whole, with bringing public attention to Karasuno for donations and also on the relationship between Hinata and Kageyama. She ends up being a sort of stepping stone between them, which makes sense considering the 3 of them are first years, helping them practice individually after they have a fight and split off for a while, and then later rejoin them as friends when the time is right. Perhaps the first and most obvious instance of her acting as a support under each of them is when they come to her for help with studying so they can pass the exam, which, if failed, would disallow them from attending the training camp. In terms of Hitoko herself, I think I enjoyed her segments as much as I did because it was really refreshing seeing such a personal story unfold which wasn't directly to do with volleyball. It was the much needed narrative focus the series needed before jumping into the comparatively multi-character heavy story of the training camp arc. Speaking of the training camp, this part of Season 2 is perhaps my favourite segment of the entire series so far. There are moments that have you on the edge of your seat, proving that Haikyuu deserves the nickname fans have awarded it, but I still appreciate the slice of life oriented half of each season. It just so happens that in Season 2's case, this stretch of episodes is particularly well done. With this arc, we see the introduction of a whole new range of exciting characters, on top of some friendly faces and of course our very own Karasuno group. The arc starts with a humorous little narrative conflict where the 2 main characters are the only ones to fail their exam and are basically left behind. Although they find their way to the training camp with the help of one cool individual, their separation from the others definitely sets these 2 up for their own very personal individual development, whereas the rest of the team more or less continues to steadily improve as a group. This is a big turning point for both Hinata and Kageyama, having their first major disagreement and quickly adapting their unique talents to take advantage of their massive potential. Alongside this, they make sure to expand on the rest of the main cast, who, after seeing the range of playstyles of other teams at this camp, start experimenting and adding new options to their repertoire. Outside of volleyball, which all the characters certainly get their fill of during this time, the camp poses as a great opportunity to socialise. So we as an audience can get our fill of comedy and wholesomeness. This kind of laid-back, friendly, intimate environment is a really refreshing change of atmosphere to see the characters interact in. The coaches and other adults drink in the evenings, the students hang out in the rooms before bed, and the managers in their own little group, and concluding with the barbecue party. It definitely feels like the sequel to, and a larger scale version of what we were teased with during Season 1. Although where my attention most readily lies is with a character who likes to stand in the background and has been with us since the very start of Season 1, Tsukishima. Since the very beginning, Suki has been a sort of black sheep amongst the rest of Karasuno. He's not a bad guy per se, although he may seem sort of bullyish at the beginning, but like all Haikyuu characters, as if by some law of the universe, he does nothing but grow on you over time, and the more we see of him, particularly in this highly development-heavy section of Season 2, we really get to understand his perspective and where his cynical attitude comes from. Much like how I mentioned there being moments we seem to view from manager Hitoka's perspective, the same can be said for Suki. In fact, we get a look at his backstory in more detail than any other character so far. He is definitely getting left behind in a certain sense, not concerning his skill level, but because his attitude differs so massively from the others. I think seeing so many new teams at this training camp who are just as engaged, if not more so, in their volleyball clubs as those he knows at Karasuno, really makes him think why he stands out not only on his own team, but in this whole community. It's like his own logical thinking and cynicism gets the better of him, not allowing himself to fully invest in the sport like everyone else. And the moment that really shakes him, even though he plays it off in his usual apathetic way, is when his childhood friend goes against him for the first time. Yamaguchi, who had obviously been following in Suki's footsteps this whole time, starts to become his own person and strives for his own goal instead of being concerned with going by Suki's non-caring persona. Being surrounded by passionate and experienced players from other schools, Suki almost gets a reset button in the form of hanging out with these guys and helping them practice, even if he only did it semi-willingly at first. However, it doesn't take long for him to start asking questions. How do I block a certain way? What's a strategy or neat trick to overcome this obstacle? To the surprise of his coach and teammates, he starts to engage more with what he can do to better himself and the team. We even see visual confirmation of this surprise, not just through the reaction of whomever Suki talks to, but from the other characters reacting in the background. It's nice to see him develop and to be reminded of the friendship amongst the cast, where even a character most of them don't personally like, they still look out for him. Although the really big moment that sets us up for payoff later on is a speech from Bokuto. First, a little about Bokuto and why him being the one to say this to Suki is a perfect choice of character. He's one of the first players we get to see a decent amount of who has reached that sort of legendary status, where his skill has earned a high level of respect in the volleyball community, even if amongst his friends he's the immature kid of the group. In fact, his straightforward no bullshit, or in other words, simple-minded volleyball nutcase personality really makes you feel like he means what he says and nothing else. It cements the importance of his knowledge, even though it might not necessarily come from a place of intelligence or wisdom, because it's connected to that instinctual drive to win that Suki just doesn't have. Having said that, Bokuto's experience is undeniable, reinforced by the presence of the other two third-year players by his side during the speech, who represent that more methodical mindset that Bokuto just doesn't abide by. He clearly has a firm grasp on the laws of volleyball, and to elaborate on what I said before, he's the first player outside of Karasuno with that wow factor, who we spend time with in a more personal environment. Needless to say, there's a reason why Tsukishima takes what he says to heart.
ぶっ潰すことと自分の力が 120% 発揮された時の快感が全て。もしもその瞬間が来たら、それがお前がバレエにハマる瞬間だ。
Tsukishima represents that person who is so invested in a mindset that it seems near impossible to break free from. In this scenario, it's definitely more self-destructive than anything else, whilst it does affect the team to a certain extent because an individual as talented as Suki, who doesn't at least try to harness that skill, prevents the team from gaining additional power. But just from a mental perspective, the other team members were more than content with what Suki could provide as is. That's why it comes as such a surprise to us in the team, with Suki quietly developing in the background, and we have creeping up on us this crescendo where it all adds up. Arguably one of the most intense, chill-inducing climaxes of the past 3 seasons, it is this moment that I'm sure finally sells Suki to the last few viewers who still didn't like him. After waiting so patiently and almost forcing his own engagement with volleyball, he finally experiences his own moment of extreme high that he's seen those others around him having, and which will have him hooked on volleyball like never before. Instead of questioning the true importance of this high school club, he's found his own experience and an emotional reason to justify caring for it.
たかが部活。
もしもその瞬間が来たら、俺がお前がバレエにハマる瞬間だ。
I think through Suki's eyes, he was almost jealous of the passion that drove these people around him to get better, but at the same time he couldn't understand why they willingly put themselves in a vulnerable position for disappointment. He's not wrong in thinking this. Caring too much about something and putting so much effort into one skill is dangerous, but what Suki gradually realises is that by forcing yourself to detach completely from any care results in having nothing left to enjoy by the end. It's in that training camp arc of season 2 that this is most evident, where he's blatantly forcing himself to not get invested, and that moment in the match against Shiratorizawa where he realises he still loves volleyball, just like when he used to watch his brother play for Karasuno, a team that he ended up joining himself, is honestly really inspiring. It's just one of the many themes that Haikyuu manages to convey so naturally without being superficial, and the willingness to allow such an amazing development to occur so quietly over the course of 3 seasons really stands as a testament to the quality of writing. Part of the reason why some of these themes Haikyuu presents us with don't seem overly in your face is the fact that they are unique to a single character, or at least have enough focus on one character that we heavily associate it with them, not even necessarily aware of it as a theme in the story, but just as a part of this individual's development. We end up in a situation where the actions of one character feel like they influence the actions of those around them and into the future. The standout example of this is none other than
いく
Oikawa.
ら攻撃力が高くてもさ、その攻撃までつなげなきゃ意味ないんだよ。
なんだ
Introduced as the first big bad intimidating player early on in Season 1, Oikawa poses as a powerhouse threat all on his own to Karasuno and the other teams in this prefecture. Perhaps the most skilled player out of everyone we see from Season 1 to the end of Season 3, he really sets an example of the masters of their craft to come, even when other players are introduced much later on who are much better than Oikawa at their focused function within their teams, which is especially so with the cast expansion we've seen recently in Season 4. Oikawa still feels like the original who set the standard for us to compare everyone else to. A major staple in Kageyama's early volleyball career, teaching him all he knew about setting, and the insinuating envious relationship between the two of them that spans the time leading up to now, it's safe to say that Oikawa and his team's rivalry with Karasuno is the main motivating force for the first 2 seasons. Even when Hinata and Kageyama declare war on Ushijima and set their eyes on beating Shirato Izawa, Oikawa and the rest of Awobi Josai feel like the other side of the coin and on equal ground to Karasuno in regards to which of them could beat Ushijima and go to nationals.
取るに足らないこのプライド絶対に覚えておけよ
Whilst it's easy to see Karasuno as the underdogs of the story, which is in large part due to the state of the team prior to the start of the series, you could argue that Oikawa is the true underdog. He's instantly likeable in that bittersweet sort of way. You either hate to love him or love to hate him, and in an alternate reality he could easily be the protagonist of Haikyuu. Oikawa, who wasn't born a volleyball prodigy, doesn't have the ingrained boundless physical intuition, and isn't surrounded by like-minded powerhouse players, was still able to grow into a top player through nothing but his own determination, pride, and honestly a mild spite towards those who have been gifted. Not everyone is as passionately driven as Oikawa to reach the level of being praised by the real geniuses and relied on by his own team. A skill set so broad and polished that even without the biological formula to succeed, and in the face of a multitude of shortcomings, attitude alone can make the difference between being forgotten and being someone to look up to. The part of the story that Haikyuu tells, which plays the role of failure, the contrast to Oikawa, is all the teams we meet along the way who don't make it past that one tournament match. The key moment when these players are brought to the spotlight we see through Hinata's eyes as he stares at the back walking away from him, of Daichi's childhood friend, the captain of the team Karasuno had just won against. Whilst it looks similar, it's not his usual force of nature or inspired determination-filled stare. A montage ensues through this meta lens, and we see perspectives of those defeated teams as they stand, sit and walk away with sunken red eyes. There's this team whose captain Daichi had an effect on long ago, which we have been following throughout this episode to their inevitable loss against Karasuno. The choice to follow them here, where we know there's no chance they can match up against their opponent, means that even the gain of a single point is worth getting pumped up about, and it's easy to see that if we'd instead followed Karasuno through this match, then it wouldn't be as meaningful. It's that moment after the losing side realises how it was his own lack of determination and commitment that led to this loss, after he asks Daichi and the Karasuno team to continue on and win where he cannot, and where Hinata looks back at the sorrow he's feeling walking away from his passion, that Hinata makes a mental statement to himself. I never want to feel like that guy feels right now. And after this exchange, it makes Karasuno's loss at the end of the season all the more painful, and Hinata and Kageyama retrospectively decide that from here on out it gets serious.
強くなれ。
So I feel pretty confident in saying that Haikyuu shows evidence of characterization at the top of its game, but that fact doesn't come solely down to the writing capabilities of the manga and anime creators. Being adapted into anime form comes along with a handful more components that must be used to match up against others in the medium, but which can also propel the source material to new heights. Amongst these is the evolution in visual complexity between the still art of manga and the moving picture of animation. When it comes to the quality of animation, Haikyuu is surprisingly consistent, but I guess that's what's to be expected coming out from a major production studio like Production IG. Whilst the 2D animation medium doesn't change in quality, or more specifically graphical fidelity, as 3D animation does, and any evidence to see that that is the case can be found in anime films from the 80s, I still think it's important to compare Haikyuu to shows released at the same time and those released now. It's easy to see that Haikyuu holds up remarkably well through any industry stylistic changes that have occurred since its first airing in 2014, especially compared to the major difference between anime released from the late 90s to early 2000s. Much like live-action TV, anime has been increasing efforts on matching up to the cinematic quality of filmmaking, and Haikyuu is no exception. Although, when looking at the more flashy, action-heavy big-budget productions like Attack on Titan Season 3 and Vinland Saga from our neighbours WIT Studio, there's an obvious difference in visual detail and fluidity. Part of the reason this may be the case is that Haikyuu, with its realistic setting and story, doesn't rely on the explosively flashy visuals that series like those use to create the most intense, visceral action sequences to wow its audience. An alternate comparison can be made not between Haikyuu and these very modern releases, but between Haikyuu and the 2011 version of Hunter x Hunter, and even with Haikyuu coming out several years after, the same observation can be made. The easiest explanation is just a different choice of style and use of their animation assets on the part of the director and producers. It makes sense that the high-profile release of a new battle shonen series based on a beloved manga, sometimes with an already existing franchise behind it, would garner a massive amount of attention from the studio and a hefty budget as a result. But when it comes down to it, compared to these anime with their big budget sequences that will be remembered in the anime community for decades to come, I have to say that what Haikyuu manages to do for the sports genre deserves a lot of respect, and is no less capable of creating moments just as impressive. I'd even go as far to say that these focused scenes where Haikyuu decides to crank up the level of detail, FPS and stylized techniques stand out even more and are more memorable in the context of the series it's a part of than is the case in those other anime. It's not always about how high your budget is, it's about how well you use it. These scenes, usually highlighting a key moment in the story during an important tournament match, or when a character's playstyle shows signs of significant change, such as when Hinata and Kageyama first pull off the new quick attack, are majorly enhanced by this quality of animation. For instance, this moment in the first episode of Season 1, where Kageyama and the audience first get to see the athletic potential of Hinata. This explosive art style completely contrasts that of his surroundings and the way any other character has been shown so far this episode. It also sets us up to expect a style like this to be used only in those rare split-second moments, making them feel more special and giving us the perspective of the players on the opposing team who are surprised by this unexpected development in the match. Just like how the raw velocity of the art breaks free from the boundaries of the frame, like it's causing that imaginary camera to hone in but barely capture them, the expectations we've gathered about that character and about what volleyball can exhibit are broken as well. Even outside of these rare moments, which only come about a handful of times each season, the more normal animation still leaves little to be desired. Every physical movement is highly exaggerated to heighten the intensity of each tiny decision made by every single player. It massively impacts our engagement and understanding of each match and the way volleyball is played in general, gaining more complexity the further our characters learn to use their skill sets. The long, stretched whip back of an arm ready to serve, the steep angle a player jumps to get over a block in mid-air, the silent freeze-frame moments as we focus on the moment of impact when a hand touches the ball, followed by that explosive crash the next second as it hits the floor on the other side of the court. Whilst viewing volleyball like this is far from what's possible in real life and could only be achieved in the animation medium, these moments of hyper-focus do not detract from that realism that Haikyuu does so well at maintaining. In fact, I'd say it's the opposite, and giving us the opportunity through animation and editing to see volleyball play out like this helps us process what is unfolding before our eyes, long enough to understand how we reach this point in the match, how it compares to what we've learned so far about volleyball and about that character, and to anticipate the completion of that action, all in a period lasting mere seconds. But Haikyuu's dedication to improving its own art quality doesn't just exist in scenes where there can be intense movement or impact. There are situations between set points or straight up away from the volleyball court altogether which show a character in ultra stylized detail. The use of harsh lines, dark shadows around the eyes and rest of the face, their unique body poses and facial expressions, the super vibrant sunset lighting and free flowing of hair can make even moments where one character is staring down another worth remembering, whilst being successful in getting across the exact emotions they're going through at that time, whether that be determination to thrash their opponent or an insatiable hunger to play another match. In more casual, often light-hearted moments, Haikyuu keeps scenes fresh and enjoyable through its comedic style animation. Anyone who's seen other popular shonen anime is more than familiar with what I'm talking about here, where the show gives characters highly exaggerated cartoony facial expressions and movements, which, whilst often a more simplified form of animation, in most cases can instead use an extreme bold and detailed style for a similar effect. Certain characters even adopt their own styles, used occasionally whenever they're involved in an obviously comedic situation, often perfectly matching what we know about their personality. Even when these styles aren't used, Haikyuu can bring attention to the comedy in a scene by eliminating everything else in our vision, like adding a blank coloured background and having two characters reacting in the bottom corner with the main character's reaction filling the frame, almost like two shots in one. And even then, in its totally normal animated style, Haikyuu can still deliver the comedy through each character's unique movements and expressions. It's almost like constant inside jokes amongst each other and the audience, except what it really is more proof of the effort put into giving these characters one-of-a-kind personality traits not going to waste. All of their personalities come out so well in these comedic scenes, you can just feel it emanating from the use of animation on top of the fantastic voice performances. It's the kind of comedy that wouldn't work as well as it does if Haikyuu didn't already succeed in those areas. The kind of jokes, silly reactions to things happening, and odd but consistently realistic scenarios naturally creating themselves in just the kind of way you'd expect from high school-aged kids.
研磨の下手くその基準は俺なのかよ。あの研磨が人見知りせずに喋ってるよ。
Whether it be banter, slapstick, unintentionally over the top, or from a perspective that just seems to make so much sense, it definitely feels like the comedy hasn't just been written and performed for the audience to react to, but authentic, as if it really exists amongst these friends and would happen in these intertwined friendships whether we were there to see it or not. You can even tell in scenes when a character is aware of the comedic potential of a situation they're in and stir it up even more at the expense of another. It's not trying to be the most absurd, funniest thing in the world, it just feels right for the characters and the scene itself. Of course it comes back to the characters in the end, as if I hadn't talked enough about that already, but it really seems like everything Haikyuu does right stems from that solid foundation. Obviously the quality and variety of animation helps showcase this, but when it comes down to just the pure design of each and every character, it seems both fit for this world they inhabit and sets a high standard for other anime to match up against. Even with such a vast cast, the designs are always so fresh and unique and never start to grow old on us, which becomes a big part of how they steer away from the typical anime character tropes and cliches. Even characters where you could definitely see how they walk the fine line between being as they are and becoming one of these anime tropes, they never seem to directly cross over in any way, remaining as unique and belonging to Haikyuu as we like them to be. The variances in hair, height and muscle definition, and of course the resting states of their faces, add onto that the fantastic animation that keeps their bodies moving and faces expressive, and you have an enormous cast of characters whose individual nuanced physical traits interact with each other and sync amazingly with the contents of their personalities. It's no wonder Haikyuu has such a thriving fan base, because this all makes us feel so much more engaged with what we're watching whilst never really bringing huge attention to itself, just joining the ranks of this living, breathing world. It's presented with enough care that even without the context of the entire series, like if you watched a random scene, you would still get a feel of the differences between these characters. The voice acting performers do such a great job at taking advantage of the exciting possibilities the existence of these characters open up to be enjoyed, whether they be strong and confident, shy, apathetic, inexperienced, personalities matching their physical attributes or contrasting it completely. Every voice for every character, even ones who have only had a handful of lines so far, feel like they have a strong bond to their character's identity. Coming up to the release of To the Top Part 1, when I was rewatching, researching and writing notes on the already complete seasons, I found this little comment in a random Reddit thread that I think really sums up my feelings towards the series. Haikyuu, on the other hand, has single-handedly made me understand why people love sports. Every episode puts an enormous smile on my face and makes me feel like a kid again, like no other show ever has. It's pure, bottled inspiration, adrenaline and magic, and I can't stop rewatching it. That's the only segment I had written down, and without the source link, I'm not sure what the context is, but I digress. This comment rings so true, and makes me think about something I'd like to talk about. Something I think audiences can sometimes get too caught up in discussing the simple fact of what it is and not what it can represent. That something is the openings and endings. Whilst other long-running anime series' openings and endings can be hit or miss, Haikyuu is pretty consistent. There's still an obvious scale, where you can see which two compete for the most fan attention, but all of them are appreciated and liked more by different percentages of the community. They're all unique enough in their music and visuals that they're easily distinguishable and apply well to their stretch of episodes, representing the place the story and characters are currently at and the overall tone of that arc, and I think it does these things better than the majority of other shonen series while staying relatively low-key. The first openings and endings are the most simple and in line with what you'd expect. Although these are the weakest and contain the most obvious shonen anime tropes, they definitely serve their purpose of giving the audience a feeling of familiarity and comfort whilst Haikyuu develops its own identity. Concerning just the first ending, its use in the series is pretty well timed, having its last use in an episode that sets our expectations to a new high for Haikyuu to propel itself into. It's the first episode we get a change in the animation over the top of the end credits, and over the top of that ending song of Karasuno and Nekoma parting ways after their debut matchup, and an after credit scene as well. This episode, number 13, and everything that came before it can almost be seen as a mini-season by itself, and definitely feels like it marks the end of the introductory period for Haikyuu. It's the last episode that feels small-scale, in that afterwards we jump into the first tournament arc and the show branches out a lot more. All of the major characters, their dynamics and relations to several plot lines have been established, and the show now has a firm self-identity and no longer needs that basic shonen opening and ending. As we see in episode 14, Karasuno is on the map again as a rising team in this prefecture, and this is where it all cranks up a notch. I'm going to skip over some of these so I don't get too caught up in analysis and collectively discuss the 4th and 5th openings together. These are without a doubt the fan favourites of the first 3 seasons, with the songs themselves being absolute bangers to go along with the most intense hype-filled arcs we've experienced so far. There's some interesting imagery thrown in there, like the crow's shadow sweeping across Oikawa and the Karasuno team climbing to the top of a mountain, and the animation itself is so amazing that it really sets itself apart from the previous openings. If there's one thing these openings had to do, it was to reinvest you in the series and be ready to watch that episode straight from the get-go, and never before have I watched an anime opening and have it make me exponentially more hyped to the extent that these two do. From the focused shots of slow motion showing us the intricate details of a specific character's movement, to the dynamic camera angles that make us feel in the midst of the action as the players move throughout the frame and sweep across the court, whether it's so fast we can barely take in the whole picture at once, or so slow and smooth that we greatly anticipate the next move. These openings are the epitome of how these tournament arcs play out and make you feel. Then there's the endings, which take a more simple approach in their animation but decide to experiment with a change in style to keep them visually memorable. In the 4th ending for the last half of season 2, specifically during the matches between Karasuno and Aoba Shosai, the song itself is so perfectly in line with the tone of that tournament that it's almost unbelievable. It's hard to express how much I appreciate this ending. I don't even think it's the best out of all of them, but I just have an affinity for those outros that carry the hype to the very end that the 20 minutes preceding it had done so well to build up, making that next episode button completely irresistible to press. It reminds me of endings from other shonen series I admire, from similarly fast-paced and intense sequences of episodes, like the 4th ending for Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, or the 2nd ending for Hunter x Hunter. It's the kind of ending that you can never imagine existing for any other series. In Haikyuu's case, this success in part comes back to the decision to use the art style they did, which might seem low effort at first sight, but actually allows the ending to stand on its own and gives more focus to the song itself rather than whatever flashy visuals they decide to throw in. And even having said that, I still like the art style they chose a lot, like I'm looking at moving manga panels with a juxtaposition between the colourless backgrounds and the coloured team outfits. I think the best ending, however, at least in terms of the actual song, is the ending used for Season 3.
力すくじゃまだ届かずしまいギリギリで繋いで放つ願いただ人やタイミングに恵まれてへこたれずにいられてる
This ending is symbolic of everything Haikyuu is about, that as intense and high stakes a tournament can be, all the teams that make up this wholesome volleyball community are like one big family. There's a lot to love about the choice to have the art be a simple long streak of every major team Karasuno has encountered so far, with each character's personality expressed in their small freeze-frame poses. Visuals aside, the song itself is special because of how it so glaringly contrasts the high-intensity tone of every episode that season. Season 3 was like they cranked everything to 11, animation, music, voice acting, story beats and episode structure, everything to enhance the feeling of adrenaline and that explosive desire to win. And you then go and have an outro sequence that's the opposite of that. It's almost like they're saying, okay, here's your minute-and-a-half recovery period, here's your time to breathe. One value that endings have over the openings is the ability to make you feel satisfied with how the episode ended, but at the same time wanting more immediately. That itch to click next episode, not wanting the season to end, needing to know what happens next and wanting to experience the highs and lows that are in store for these characters. Even when not binge watching, you'll still have that happy glow aftertaste. It seems in some cases that every episode tops the next, but thinking back, it's impossible to decide which one was your favourite, and that's not because it becomes one big blur, because these episodes stand well on their own as well. There's very few other anime series I can say that about where it's impressively consistent and constantly building off of the plotlines, character arcs and energy of everything before it. In Haikyuu's case, the tournament arcs are most memorable because of their full-on, in-your-face, emotionally climactic action-packed scenes, but they still don't overshadow the comparatively mellow, slice-of-life oriented moments of each season, which, if containing moments you can personally relate to, may even be more memorable. Haikyuu has such a range of emotions that take place across a season, so many different atmospheres like nostalgia, melancholy, drowsiness, contemplative, and of course the fiery exhaustion of a match. Some of the times we get a quick breather to take it all in are the same times the characters get to relax, but before you know it, we're back in the game and set on our goals. The number one biggest thing that aids Haikyuu on its journey through these contrasting tonal changes is the soundtrack. If my own use of these songs throughout this video is any indication, then it's easy to agree that this is some good shit. Like any great music, it's easy, even having perhaps only heard the song once, to get it stuck in your head, and as a matter of fact, the numerous songs from Haikyuu that make up my favourites were one of the motivating forces to get me in the right headspace to write or edit. Haikyuu succeeds not only in having memorable and catchy tunes, but in those tunes being able to instantly change your mood and transport you back to whenever you watched the series. And it doesn't just have a small handful of these songs of this quality either. I wouldn't even say there were 10 or 20, because the truth is the majority of Haikyuu songs are at this level. Maybe it's just a case of me having watched the series numerous times, listened to the soundtrack, and of course heard them on repeat in the process of editing. And if those things were false and I had only experienced the songs from a single watch through, then it wouldn't have such a profound effect on me. But I can't deny that whenever the time has come to pick out another song for a sequence in the video, I struggle with my decision.
小さくても戦える術が欲しいのか。違う。俺も全てねじ伏せるシンプルな強さが欲しい。
For the record, I don't think this is the definitive best anime soundtrack by any means, but it's certainly a contender in my book, and never before have I witnessed the sheer quantity of quality music as is present here being produced for a single series, and with such variety as well. There are so many different musical styles used across the albums for each season, and never do they feel conflicting in any way. One moment you're hearing a groovy, jazzy bass and guitar, and the next a contemplative piano or electronic piece. Good soundtrack can't make a bad anime good, but it can elevate a good anime to greater heights. It shouldn't take you out of the anime completely, just enough to appreciate what you're hearing in harmony with the visuals, enhancing what we're already getting out of a scene or reforming our emotions to a place not unfamiliar, but which we would never have reached otherwise. The music in Haikyuu feels particularly well used for a long-running series, not to be compared to the likes of soundtrack from movies or short series, which in their shorter running times have less reason to reuse songs over and over. Haikyuu, on the other hand, whilst it uses the same songs multiple times, manages to do so in a way that doesn't devalue the emotional impact of that specific song, usually relating it to the events of a scene almost like a callback to something similar we've previously experienced, which in turn gives us a comforting feeling of familiarity with the scene as it's unfolding without going overboard, which might give the scene an off-putting deja vu type eeriness. For instance, there are songs that are very obviously relating to a single character or a single volleyball team which are first used at the time of the subject's first visual introduction, and then occasionally whenever they are the focus of a scene later on. The songs develop alongside the characters and story, often laying the foundation of emotional context to a scene so that we are already anticipating how what is about to happen will make us feel and how the characters might react. This also sets up the music to be used as a tool to positively subvert those surface level expectations, so that whilst the music is often used as a means to make us feel at ease, it can be used to a more intense degree when it matters most for standing out and making that moment particularly memorable. This might occur when our characters realise that a player they were not concerned with before surprises them with a new technique or unseen playing style that instantly gives them a more intimidating presence and makes them a formidable obstacle to overcome. My favourite example, and easily the most extreme case of a scenario like this, is the explosive arrival of Aoba Josai's hidden weapon, which we first see at a most unexpected time during the match when Karasuno is at set point. This song, only used for this one character for the 2 episodes it takes for Karasuno to overcome his playstyle, features the use of instruments that have never been seen so far in the rest of the Haikyuu soundtrack, and massively contrasts the sound of everything else. Just like how the song is a foreign element in the episode, so is the character, and each of these components together disrupts the flow of the match and our emotions of the scene completely, quite literally placing a block in the cogwheels of Karasuno's plans. Most of the time, however, the music just aids the scenes on their natural trajectory, helping to set the pace of editing to keep the narrative beats coming at a smooth rate, especially during montages where the music dominates the sound. When other sound effects are in play, the music doesn't feel overbearing. You still notice it enough to reinforce the mood, but it doesn't let you lose track of what's going on, which is most important during fast moments of a match where the sound effects help carry the momentum between shots. Whether it be the impact of a hand smacking a ball, the frantic squeaks of shoes across the floor as opposed to the calmly nostalgic use of the same sounds at less intense times, the roaring of the crowd, or the calls of our characters as they try to keep the ball in play. Never during these moments does the music feel unintentionally at conflict with the sound effects. At its core, the reason Haikyuu is so good is its ability to balance being extremely engaging whilst keeping a hold of those values that allow the audience to form a deep connection. The main character, Hinata, is the very manifestation of Haikyuu, embodying everything it's about. The genuine hard work that he puts in to reach such simple goals, showing admiration along the way and enthusiasm for his peers and for new experiences. Hinata, whilst having his dream of being the #1 ace, the likes of the Little Giant, still respects the history of the sport, so that when up against rival teams who are superior to him in numerous ways, he doesn't seek to envy or destroy them. He just wants to get better and win.
もう一回がない試合やるぞ春高で
Haikyuu is a really well executed sports comedy with a strong affinity for its characters, excelling well in all areas without feeling boastful about it. That's what makes watching Haikyuu such a pleasant experience, expelling this atmosphere wherein it respects and uses to its advantage all of the knowledge and skills presented in other sports anime in order to craft the best story possible, to be the best volleyball player. When I watch Haikyuu, I'm not just watching another sports anime, I'm watching Haikyuu. The comment usually comes up whenever hearing someone discuss Haikyuu about why, with such a disinterest in sports, would anyone find so much thrill in an anime that spends more than half of its time on a sport, and not a particularly prestigious one at that, because in my case at least, prior to watching Haikyuu I never once had a serious thought about volleyball, and yet now I find myself more intrigued by it and with more understanding of it than any other. The only explanation I can conjure is something that seems to be more or less contained amongst people who have watched Haikyuu rather than any other anime of this genre, which is that the question of whether you're interested in sports after having watched Haikyuu isn't even in your mind as to why you liked Haikyuu so much. You get the impression that Haikyuu never directly glorified sports or glorified playing volleyball. Instead, if it glorified anything, it would be the behind-the-scenes effort, passion and growth that is represented by all our characters. So many of the stories in Haikyuu aren't dedicated entirely to the climax. When the characters reach a goal, they set their eyes on another and continue to improve their game, for no reason other than feeling an insatiable need to at their very core. You see Hinata at the start of season 1, and although over time his volleyball rabbit hole has gone deeper and deeper, he's still the same person, someone who possesses zero shame for his lack of skill or knowledge. There's no ill will to his friends who could barely help in that first tournament because he was just enthralled with the fact that he gets to play at all. Even if Hinata never got better, even if Karasuno never made it to nationals, and there was no real climax, no real ending to each season, Haikyuu would still be a great series for the display of love and passion and desire to improve at the things you care about.